folks, welcome back. My name is Warbass. I'm going to talk through a little bit about what's going on in this patch and then play out what I just kind of performed here at the end of this. If you've been following along, I've been working on this more drum-focused heavy case, which is adjacent to my more ambient and sample mangling case. This patch is almost entirely this case. It is using Starlab over there, which I'll talk about in a second. And then the actual final signal is going through Shackman High Pass, Liberlegio, and then being recorded on the 4MS wave recorder in that case over there. So there's a couple of modules over there off screen that are being used. The actual reverb being brought in and out is being done by this crossfader. So you can kind of see each time using it. And otherwise, Starlab isn't being modulated or anything off screen. So it's not super, super crucial that it's visible. But what's going on in our spaghetti today? There's a couple of main parts. Obviously, our Ericson drum sequencer is controlling and triggering the LXR. I arranged the drum pads. Let's see if I can do this for you. Let's open up our filters. Make sure things are no more feedback. Let's see. All right. So I typically lay these out as drums 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 across the different inputs on the LXR. What that kind of equates to as like kick A, kick B, tomish sound, snare clap, closed hi-hat, hi-hat, sorry, or open hi-hat. The 16th trigger down here is really just clocking the delay. So if you look at that, it's just constantly being clocked, whereas the kick is a little bit more random. This kind of B kick is much more fake side chained here, skipping every quarter note. Hi-hats with a little open at the end of the phrase. So nothing extremely unique happening over here. I'm mostly hanging out with the mute section, turning things on and off as they come through. That LXR signal is then being broken up. The kick is being side chained and goes into channel 1, which I have hacked this Endorphin's cockpit open to make channel 1 actually mono instead of a tip ring sleeve stereo. There's a video about that. I'll put it up there in case you feel like doing that to theirs. It wasn't that tricky. Then there's a mix of these three, I believe, or I think it's actually maybe just these two drums going channel 2, also as mono, and then a stereo out for snares and hats into channel 3 on the Endorphin's cockpit. Chaos is really just doing modulation over here for the Polygogo. Mostly random stuff. There's a little bit of rhythm. It's actually doing the triggering on channel 1, and the rest is just generating some randomish CV that is being looped for everything else that I've mostly dialed back from earlier in the patch when I was playing with this, where I would use these quite a bit more, but I've pulled that back just a little bit. On the Lapsus Oz, I really have just two things going on here. One is just the dry wet on Nautilus. Let's just go back to here. And then the second channel is just a kind of duplicate and also a attenuator on the left right here of the joystick for controlling, on channel 4, how the cutoff on my 200 grits. 200 grit. The other fun thing that's happening is the vertical axis here is changing the two kits. So I've got two different kits set up on the LXR that we are changing in between. I already mentioned the reverb here doing the crossfading. Let's see what's going on with that. We're in 100 times mode. There we go. Crossfader's doing the reverb on Starlab. And and a bit of delay or echo over there, which combined with this is a little bit of fun. Polygogo is really just playing a constant note. I know I have this patched, but I do have just really a single pitch playing. I just set it up this way, dial it back to that single pitch, and then I didn't want to unplug it because then it would change the tuning, and I kind of liked the note that it was playing. Not that I know what note that particularly was. The trigger out of channel 1 for chaos is triggering an envelope on maths that is then just opening the filter. So I don't have a traditional VCA on Polygogo. I'm just opening and closing the filter. I don't have it going through these. That works fine for what I'm doing here, and I can dial up and down that filter to bring it in and out, controlling, again, how much the envelope is actually moving the filter. When it's not in position, it's closed enough that you don't really hear it, unless I want to open it all the way up and essentially like disable the envelope and let the entire Polygogo sound start to just drone, and then I can pull it back down and let the envelope kind of do its thing, opening and closing the filter to control that. So the entire the Polygogo then goes into channel 4 here. So there's that filtering I was just talking about. And again, that rhythm is being set just by chaos determining a loop, and I grabbed the loop at one point and I've kept it that way. And I can turn it all the way down there, and it nearly goes all the way out, and I can all the way mute it at the cockpit level if I need to. So behind these two modules, there's a little cable that connects the two of them. So the entire signal from the cockpit goes right into Golden Master, which I just used to kind of mute a couple frequency bands at different points. Left and right from there is going into my 200 grit setup for left and right, which again is being modulated on channel 4 of the joysticks in terms of just the cutoff. And on channel 3, I have the other FM input. Let's see if I can. Well, let's change this back. Come on. There we go. I've undone all my CV. This can get real squealy. This is just a more chaotic stereo thing, so the X and Y are being controlled separately on these 200 grits instead of where I have it on channel 4. They're being controlled in sync, so it's acting as a single stereo filter on channel 4. And if I switch to channel 3, then they're each being acted independently. And I do that a little bit when I want it to get really crazy and chaotic. The mix, the distortion mix out of the 100 grits is going into Nautilus, which I guess I play with it just a little bit throughout. But again, I have that dry wet down here when I want to do that because I don't feel like reaching up and grabbing the absolute tiniest dry wet knob, which my issue with Nautilus is at this point pretty similar to my issue with Beats, is they've taken some of the most fun knobs to play in Crab and made them tiny. And some of the larger knobs that can so easily screw up the sound completely that you actually don't really want to grab and throw are taking up so much space. And so I'm glad there's a CV to it, which is great. Same with beads too, but it's silly that like the thing that I want to play with the most on it, just by default before I get to anywhere else, is initially the mix. And from there, let's start to play with the other things. And the fact that that's not like a bigger knob on here is a little silly. I've got plenty of channels, so it's not a big deal. It's not a breaker or like a breaking point or anything like that. But it is just kind of a silly thing with these effects units. The other kind of interesting thing I have going on here that you'll notice if you have keen eyes, each 100 grit has two outputs. There's a distortion output and it's just a regular output, which is essentially using it just as a straight filter and not the distortion portion of the circuit, if I'm understanding things correctly. I actually have the regular output of each module going into the second input of the opposing module, which is down and kind of completely off for the most of the performance. And when I really wanted to get weird feedback territory and kind of atonal and break away from rhythms, I can then come in and turn these up and you can hear it already start to get weird. Let's see if I adjust where we're at. You can see it already. The feedback really starts to get kind of crazy. If I play that, it gets to just really weird spots quickly, especially if I add the 200 time switches. It just starts to sing on its own, which I love how just chaotic and hard to control it is. Every once in a while with Modular, there's these points that feel really familiar to, like, the metaphor that keeps coming up in my head, and I haven't tried to explain this before, is when you're learning to drive a car, and there's like a certain point that I remember kind of very fondly from my teens learning to drive, where you really don't feel in control. Yeah, you've got this big thing in front of you. You're just kind of like trying to keep it in the lane, and it's kind of doing what it wants, and you're just trying to keep up. Maybe not the best metaphor, but then there's a kind of shifting point, and I think it's a very memorable feeling where you actually start to feel like you're the one driving, pun intended. And I think it's nice, and how I like to play Modular is to try and find that line and let yourself teeter on either side of it. And that, to me, that's the most fun part of this. If everything here was completely perfectly in time and in tune, and I knew exactly what was going to happen the whole time, that'd be great. It'd be a fun instrument, but it wouldn't be nearly as fun to me personally as if there weren't aspects to this that I had to kind of not wrestle with, but almost play catch up to. Like, I can send it in a direction, and then I become kind of an equal listener and passenger in where it's going. And then it's up to me to kind of know how to steer it back on track and kind of course correct the sound instead of completely knowing exactly what's happening and keeping it on lock the whole time. Being in that space where you're kind of just acting as the guardrails and kind of nudging it a little bit this way, a little bit that way, and letting the instrument kind of explore those creative uncertainties, which has a lot to do with module selection, has to do with how you're patching, and just what you're personally into. But that for me is something that I think is actually pretty common between my B case, which is again very manual trigger, drum heavy case, and my A case, which is more stereo sample focused and audio mangling. Both of them to me have the similar kind of just on the cusp of learning to drive feel when I play them. And I don't think that that's something that I ever want to lose. I think as you play with them more and more and more, you are of course going to get more and more comfortable with the feeling and more experience on the like feeling completely in control of it. But the beauty of Modular is being able to then completely repatch, do it in a different way, get into a different sound space, and bring yourself back into that new creative territory that to me is just a ton of fun. So I've been talking for way too long. I'll let the actual performance play out from here for those of you who are still listening. Eventually I'll do a more detailed patch from scratch for this case. There's just a couple of tiny things that I'm still trying to refine, and I want to have it a little bit more fleshed out and some of the different possibilities ironed out so I can talk in that video for a lot longer and patch it up with you and get into a bit more of the weeds of how I use each individual thing besides just the specifics of what I did in this patch. So thank you for listening. Till next time. Peace.